With 10 minutes and 24 seconds left in the third period. On the road, the Colorado Avalanche coach, Patrick Roy, yes, that very same Patrick Roy, credited with popularizing the butterfly goaltending style, pulled the goalie. A play typically reserved for the dying minutes of the game, this decision to empty the net was so unexpected that the Canucks commentary team thought instead that the goalie was moving off due to a delayed penalty.
Vancouver penalty coming. No, sorry, Patrick Roy pulled the goalie here with half a period to go.
This was a tactic employed multiple times by Roy in the 2013-14 season, most notably in the first game of the playoffs, where with 3 minutes to go, he pulled goalie Semyon Varlamov, a decision which led to this.
Players in front, McKinnon not challenged. Johnson, shot, set, rebound, there it is.
The Avalanche would win in overtime. Roy pulled his goalie with over 2 minutes left for 4 different occasions in that series. Twice it led to overtime winners, but twice it led to a loss. Roy was credited with making the phenomena of pulling the goalie into a big storyline in the Stanley Cup playoffs by NHL.com. Now, Roy is not the only one to pull the goalie early, but Roy was not without his critics. Longtime coach Craig Ramsay, who was with the Oilers at the time, said there is nothing wrong with it, but for me, that's a little early. The most last-ditch of plays in the NHL, pulling the goalie has long fascinated statisticians and fans. Was Roy bold, or was he plain silly? I'm Decoding Hockey, and today I'm going to answer the question, when is the best time to pull the goalie? Let's start by looking at the state of coaching decisions as they currently exist. In all game situations in which one team was trailing in the last 2 minutes, the goalie was pulled 98% of times in the last season. Teams are 3 times more likely to score with an extra attacker than they are at even strength. However, their opponents are 6.5 times more likely to score when there's no goaltender in the net. In the 2019-20 season, data compiled by Megan Hall shows that when down by 1 goal, the average team pulled the goalie with 1 minute and 46 seconds left on the clock. When down by 2, this extends to 2 minutes and 38 seconds. Trailed by 3 and it's 3 minutes and 51 seconds. This time has creeped longer over the years. However, Roy's average time of 2 minutes and 40 seconds is a full minute earlier than the league average was at that time. Was he a revolutionary, or was he just taking an unnecessary risk? What can statistics tell us about the optimal time to pull the goalie? We can apply a simulation model to help determine optimal goalie pulling strategies by comparing the relative likelihood to score in different scenarios, such as with an extra attacker or against an empty net. So this idea has been around since the 1980s and has been iterated on by a number of researchers. In 2001, Zia Zaman introduced a modeling style of approach rather than a simulation-based approach. Now his model, using dynamic programming, extended the recommended time to over 6 minutes. Zaman's model was very complex and involved hand timing aspects of how long pucks took to move from certain segments of the ice. This complexity makes it very difficult to replicate with modern numbers. However, I'm going to show that we're able to make roughly as accurate a prediction using far less parameters. In 2018, Asness and Brown of a Connecticut investment management firm produced a model to optimize behavior based on a small number of parameters. This kind of model is not quite as accurate, but it avoids overcomplicating reality and applying too broad a theoretical constraint on what is at its core a very free-flowing sport. It also gives us a scaffold on which we can make predictions given our own datasets taken from the 2019-20 season. For this model, we look at 5 inputs. The first is the probability of scoring a goal when at even strength. The second is the probability of scoring with an extra attacker. And by logic, the third is the probability of scoring against an empty net. We also need to tell the model the goal differential, or the current score in the game, and how long is left. For the first parameter, we need to calculate the probability of scoring the goal at any time that a team was playing at even strength. We can take half of the total number of goals that was scored at even strength, and divide this by the number of minutes played at even strength, these numbers also coming from Evolving Hockey. This gives us an average rate of 0.04 goals per team per minute. Turning this number into something useful in the model, we can determine that each team has a 0.69% chance of scoring in any 10-second interval. For the second probability of scoring with an extra attacker, we use the same logic, and we get a 2.09% chance of scoring a goal in any 10-second interval. We also get 4.23% for a team that's shooting into an empty net. If we stop our analysis here and merely compare these two statistics, then pulling the goalie provides a negative outcome for your team. Your opponents are much more likely to score than you. However, the result of a goal being scored is not what teams care about. They care about the number of standing points which arise from each outcome, or whoever can score a goal first. A loss by 1 is the same as a loss by 2 in the NHL. You receive no standing points. With a problem like this, it's important to define the correct outcome metric to attempt to optimize. Our model will produce an expected value, or a measure of what sort of outcome we can expect given probabilities by repeating a behavior over and over. In the NHL, we would expect to earn 0 standing points if we are trailing at the end of a game. If we're tied at the end of regulation, then we might expect to earn 1.5 points, coming from a 50-50 chance of either gaining 2 points for a win or 1 point for an overtime loss. If we lead at the end of the game, then we would expect to earn 2 points in the standings. Framing the problem in this way is important, as the model produces expected point values. It determines how many standing points we are likely to win as a result of making the choice to pull the goalie or to not. To solve these equations, we need to use what is known as dynamic programming. Now, I've written some Python code based on the model of Asmussen Brown, which works to solve the mathematics. We can tell the model what the current score is and how long is left in the game. It will analyze performance in 10-second segments, assuming that the team optimally pulls the goalie and replaces the goalie. And the model will tell us how many standing points we expect to earn by either pulling the goalie now or pulling the goalie 10 seconds in the future. We would generate an expected point value if we pull the goalie now, and if we don't pull the goalie, but act optimally after. These decisions are fixed in our model for the next 10 seconds, and this is due to the time it takes for a goalie to get onto or off of the ice. When a coach makes a decision to pull the goalie, he must live with that. Depending on the change in circumstances, the team may wish to change their behavior in the future. Say you're down by 1 goal with 2 minutes left. If you pull the goalie and score within 10 seconds to level the score, then you're going to put the goalie back in for the rest of the game so that you don't give up an easy goal. For more detail on the expected points and the exact mathematics in the model, I would suggest looking at the literature by Asmussen Brown and future work by Zaman, linked in the description. Now that we have a brief understanding of how the model works, let's have a look at what it can tell us. We can plot the map of expected points when pulling the goalie for each 10-second interval. And we also see that of not pulling the goalie now, but maybe pulling it in the future. First thing we see is that these two plots are very similar. The numbers from the two behaviors are always going to be close, because if it is favorable to pull the goalie now, then the model that doesn't pull the goalie now will only have their goalie in for 10 seconds, and take the first opportunity it can to follow the same trajectory as the pull line. To determine more generally when the best time is to pull the goalie, we want to see the time at which the value for pulling now outweighs that of waiting another 10 seconds. When trailing by 1 goal, that crossover point comes at 400 seconds. Therefore, if trailing by 1, once the clock reaches 6 minutes and 30 seconds to go in the third period, you should pull the goalie to have the best chance of earning the most points. If it's at 6 minutes and 40 seconds, then you're advantaged by waiting another 10 seconds before pulling. Pulling the goalie optimally earns an expected 0.48 points. Never pulling the goalie and continuing to play at even strength would only expect to earn 0.3 points. That is, in roughly 1/5 of games you would expect to score that tying goal in the last 6.5 minutes at even strength. Giving yourself the chance of an extra attacker increases those odds to almost 1 in 3. According to Asmussen Brown, a team that practices optimal pulling across an entire game can generate 0.05 points per game. This equates to just over 4 points in a season, and in 2018-19 both the Canadiens and the Coyotes missed the playoffs by less than this margin. There is benefit from pulling more aggressively when down by 1. If we expand this to when you're trailing by 2 goals, then the optimal time to pull balloons out to 930 seconds, or with 15 minutes and 30 seconds to go in the third period. Now, it's interesting to note that if you score, we can use our models to determine these optimum times, but we can also plug any situation in and compare the optimal behavior. Returning to Wa's decision, with 10 minutes to go and trailing by 4 goals, his Avalanche team at even strength could expect to score 0.01 points. It's very unlikely that they score the 4 points needed to take it to overtime. We can see that the expected points of pulling is 0.05, so it's still highly unlikely that they score the 4 goals, but pulling the goalie is the statistically optimal decision, and increased his team's odds of collecting points from 1 in every 150 chances to 1 in every 30 chances. Early models from the 1980s with higher scoring rates and much higher empty net scoring rates agree that when down by 1, anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes is the optimal time to empty the net. As scoring has reduced over this time, the model we have developed in 2020, the model it was based on in 2018, and the original Markov model in 2011 all agree that the goalie should be pulled close to the 6-minute mark. Despite the widespread prevalence of this advice, numerous news articles and many reports, in the 2019-20 season the average time for a coach to pull their goalie was only 1 minute and 46 seconds, not 6 minutes 30. With the financial backing behind big teams, it would be naive to assume that coaches are unaware of the numbers, or they don't have the resources to compute them. So why are coaches hesitant to pull their goalie until very late in the game? The issue with these models is that they attempt to constrain the fluid and fast-paced sport of hockey to a set of probable scenarios and outcomes. Returning to Wa again, he was only successful in generating points 4 out of the 18 times he pulled the goalie with between 1 and 4 minutes left in the game in the 2013-14 season. 2019-20, if a team trailed by 1, then they were successful in earning points 18% of the times. The numbers show that coaches can and should afford to be more adventurous in pulling when down by 1 goal, especially if you include factors to mitigate risk, such as only going for it during offensive zone face-offs. The numbers start to get a lot less appealing when we look to pull the goalie when down by 2 goals. 244 teams did this in 2019-20, but only 4 came back to win or tie. That's less than 2% of all attempts. When it happens, it's incredible, and one such success was when the Canucks were at home in late November.
Here's a snapshot, they score! Yes, Pettersson was not in his wheelhouse, gets it back, there's the shot, rebound, Besser scores! Brock Besser has tied the game!
If you pull when down by 3 goals, then I have no footage to show you, as no team avoided defeat, despite the tactic being tried 57 separate occasions. I think the major reason that teams are reluctant to improvise and take this bold strategic leap comes down to the fact that we're dealing with very low rates of occurrence and even lower likelihoods to succeed. We saw with Wa that his team would expect to force overtime in 1 in 30 attempts. The 2018-19 Avalanche only lost by 4 goals 3 times, meaning that you'd expect to see a benefit from this strategy once every 10 years. Our model states that because you're still likely to lose, you may as well go for it, even at the risk of losing by more goals. But there is something psychological that wants to make us avoid entering situations that are overwhelmingly likely to add to our own misery. By performing optimally when down by 2 goals, if you get lost in the statistics, then it's clear that pulling earlier is preferred. But when abstracting to reality, the average scenario states that if trailing by 2, you can expect to take the game to overtime once every 67 regular season games. The strategy might earn you a 1.5 points in a season, but will result in many games where the opposition puts puck after puck after puck into an empty net, running up the score against you. Coaches are forced into consistent performance to live up to fans' expectations. Pulling the goalie is high-risk, last-ditch effort, and seen by fans as throwing away any chance of winning should the opposition gain possession. Fans want to see exciting hockey. By pulling the goalie, the spectacle is heightened temporarily, but it forces a rapid conclusion. You either tie the game, or the opponent puts the game to bed. Leaving the goalie in, and we can experience some of the most engaging minutes of hockey, wishing our team to score a goal as that clock ticks down to 0. Unless teams start pulling goalies with 6 minutes to go, we won't be able to truly analyze its relative effectiveness in real life. However, based on current coaching behavior, the potential long-term benefits of 1 or 2 points per season don't seem to outweigh the immediate gut feeling that giving your opponents an empty net makes things too easy for your team to get demoralized by getting points piled against them. The numbers say coaches can afford to be more adventurous when down by 1 or 2 goals, but don't expect to see wild-style aggression becoming widespread anytime soon. It will take a coach who can secure their job for years on end, who's happy to have his team lose by 4, 5, maybe even 6 goals a night, in order for the team to gain that slight absolute advantage of such a bold strategy. But who knows? That might be the difference between their team playing playoff hockey or not. The next time the clock reaches 6 minutes and 30 seconds, are you going to shout at your team to pull the goalie? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.